welcome you to this important public forum. Important because of the events that are going on around the world. That means this sort of forum is even more important than usual. Let me also acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We acknowledge the work of their elders and stewards, past and present. The topic tonight is about what I would call a violent jigsaw, and which has left so many people not only dismayed but confused, I think, about the Syrian civil war. So tonight's topic, the Syrian crisis, Aleppo, the lost city, has two speakers who are going to help us to put some of the pieces of the jigsaw together. Dr. Roger Shanahan is a fellow from the Lowy Institute. Roger has an MA in International Relations and Asian Studies from the AMU. He has a PhD in Arab and Islamic Studies from Sydney University. His supervisor, I gather, was one of the other speakers tonight, but that's not really part of the agenda. Roger has an interesting career working for the UN in Lebanon and Syria, and in embassies in Saudi Arabia and in Abu Dhabi. And is also a member of the Refugee Tribunal. Professor Ahmed Shboul, most of you will know, who is a frequent contributor to Politics in the Pub. Ahmed's particular interest and expertise is in the history and historiography of Arab Islamic studies, but he's also somebody who's fascinated by the literature and the poetry of different parts of the Middle East, and in particular, this is important to me, the work of the national Palestinian poet, Mahmoud Darwish. Far more important than that, Ahmed is a great friend, a great colleague, somebody who always contributes to a sense of civility and a commitment to universal human rights. Those things, Ahmed, are almost more important than all your publications. He also has that quality which is crucial at this time, perhaps always, it's called a sense of humour. Anyway, we're going to start off with Ahmed coming to the microphone.
Thank you, Stephen. Good evening, everybody. I hope I don't disappoint you about the sense of humor bit, because the subject is so saddening. It would be very difficult to get even, maybe there's a lot of irony about it, so we might be able to do some irony. I don't promise to read any poetry. I mean, had you warned me, Stuart, I would have psychologically prepared myself. So what I'm going to start with, actually, I mean, I like the first half of the title of this event, which is the Syrian crisis. I mean, I don't like the crisis, obviously, but the title makes sense to me. But the second half, Aleppo, the lost city, I'm going to raise some quibbles about it. In other words, I'm going to raise some questions, what do we mean by the lost city? It lost to whom, who has lost it? Who are the losers? And why wasn't it described as lost, about 2 years ago, for example, when the so-called opposition militants occupied the eastern half? It doesn't become lost only when the Syrian troops recovered the eastern half, or because they destroyed the city with the help of the Russians and the Iranians. I'm going to also add that there are different perspectives through which we can look at the crisis and also the situation in Aleppo. There is first, I think this is the most prominent on the media for us here in this part of the world. That's what I call the Western geopolitical perspective. It so happens that today I received a copy of Le Monde of about 2 weeks ago, in which one of the former foreign ministers of France, Hubert Védrine, laments what he calls the failure of the West in general, And then I found also that Der Spiegel, the German newspaper, had an article by staff, not named, where they also have lamented the failure of the West a year ago in connection with Aleppo. So it seems to me that Western media, and including Western statesmen like Berlin, are concerned about the status, the position, the leadership of those, particularly of the United States, and of course Europe, in the world. Because Berlin goes on to talk about, you know, what happened when the USSR Poland, and then you have the unipolar New World Order, which was promulgated by George Bush Sr. And then he goes on about the failure. I mean, first he talks about the failure in the sense of lack of leadership, but also in the sense of mistakes made, particularly under George Bush Jr. So that's one perspective. There is another perspective which I suspect may have initially got our title like this, and that's what I call the Western archaeological and art history perspective. Our dear friend and colleague Ross Burns just published a book on Aleppo from his archaeological and art history perspective. He was also a diplomat in Syria for some years. So to that extent, the discussion is about the loss of the city and its monuments, in particular, a great city, of course. Then there is what I would call the Syrian indigenous perspective, or numerous perspectives actually. There is one which concerns people who have been used to think of themselves as having a Syrian national identity, and now this identity has practically been destroyed and been replaced by sectarian and ethnic strife in not just Aleppo but also in the country. So one of the things we need to talk about in a minute is, you know, how did that come about? What happened to the Syrian sense of national harmonious identity? Then we can talk about a cultural and socio-economic perspective. That's to say, to compare very briefly the situation in Syria before the outbreak of the civil war, so before 2011, when in fact the Syrian Republic was the only Arab country and probably the only country in the world which did not have foreign debt. It's remarkable. And its economy was flourishing despite the fact that it was run by a dictatorship. So that's another one. Then of course, to me, the most important one really at the end is the humanitarian perspective. Because you know, we can talk about all the other aspects, and then we mustn't forget what has befallen the population of Aleppo and also of other parts of Syria like Homs, many other towns around Damascus, and in the south, and in Jazeera, Raqqa, and you know, all other places, the area near the Syrian border, even near Latakia, all these areas have suffered very severe humanitarian destruction. Of course, loss of life, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, and also many others, 100,000 injured, millions displaced, whether within Syria or in the neighboring countries like Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, or far beyond. Some of them have arrived in Australia, and others went to Europe. Some of them suffered on the way. So this is another important aspect, and also the destruction of the infrastructure of the whole of the country, which means educational services. You know, there's now a new generation of kids who haven't been to school if they stayed in the danger areas. The destruction of the health services, all these are very important. Now, I'm going to focus on another series of points which I have jotted down because I really prefer to talk about the whole of Syria, not just Aleppo. Let me just also refer to some of my own personal experience. because it so happens, I mean, I was born in North Jordan, got my secondary education there, but I went to the University of Damascus to study some decades ago, that's before actually, shall we say, it's really in the first 4 years of the 1960s. And I also visited Aleppo many times, and of course we visited Syria a couple of times also with my wife that was there. So I had that kind of personal connection with the country and the population. And let me just highlight one important point to do with the question of national identity and its destruction. When I was in Damascus and when I visited later, it was very clear to me that the sectarian problem was not there. It may have been, you know, under the surface, but must have been very deep under the surface. You have to dig for it. And I think what this crisis has done, it has done that terrible digging for it. In other words, at the university, in our journeys, because I did both history and geography, we did a lot of travel around Syria. And in the marketplace, and where I lived with so many families in Syria, both Christian and Muslim, Shia and Sunni. I didn't feel any tension between the people, whether at the individual level or at the group level. So one of the issues really we need to address is how did it come about that this now surfaced as a sectarian problem at a certain level. We also need to remember that, say if we want to talk about Aleppo, Aleppo has a very significant history as not just as the second most populous and most active city culturally in the Syrian Republic, but as a very important city in the whole region. In fact, if you think of what is now known as or has been known as the Silk Roads, and there's some new publication about the subject. Actually, Aleppo was one of the important hubs of the so-called Silk Road, in the sense that it was an important center for trade between the whole range of the Middle East, obviously the Eastern Mediterranean, including Asia Minor, Turkey, and also Iraq and Lebanon and Palestine and Jordan, as well as Syria, and the link with Iran and Central Asia and as far as India. In fact, there is a saying in Aleppo which says, a lame man from Aleppo could easily reach India. In other words, even lame people can go as far as India as traders. The people of Aleppo are famous for this activity. In fact, a part of the monuments of Aleppo are some important caravanserais, or shall we say, trade agencies for the Venetians, the Genoese, and other, the Swiss and the French and so on. Some of them actually going back to at least the 17th century. Throughout the 18th, 19th century and early 20th, this went on. The first British consuls, for example, were placed in Aleppo in the Eastern Mediterranean, and their role was both, of course, commercial as well as diplomatic. So that's very important, which led, of course, to the prosperity of the city. You can say the same thing about Damascus, of course. Now, let me just very briefly highlight some of the developments which could be seen as the background to the troubles which Syria is undergoing at the moment. Syria was part of the Ottoman Empire from 1516 until 1918. Then it came under the French mandate until 1946. Then it became a completely independent republic with multi-party political system and parliament and so on. In fact, I remember as a schoolboy in Jordan, used to visit Damascus, and elections in Damascus in the 50s and the early 60s were very free, and you had many parties participating, whether they are Islamic or sectarian, secular, socialist, communist parties, and so on. I think one of the important factors which to me have caused problems in Syria was the rise of the Ba'ath Party to power. you telling me people were not hearing you?
No one told me.
I can't hear it, that's why I was.
That's okay? Okay. All right. Is that better? Okay. Now the rise of the Ba'ath Party is an old party which started in the 40s in Damascus. Actually, it was formed, which is symbolic, by a Christian and a Muslim. Two intellectuals who studied in Paris came home and formed it. It's a nationalist, socialist, Syrian party, but also pan-Arab. Now, to begin with, the party had a sort of very idealistic agenda for itself. But when it got into power, which happens a lot with political parties, they change completely. And I think I could mark the beginning of real problems politically in Syria with the emergence of the Ba'ath Party as the major one and eventually the only ruling party. I remember I was in my last year at the university, 63, 64, when there was one of the last series, after that one, the last series of coup d'etats. And the Ba'ath assumed power. And from then onwards, I think the problems started at different levels. One of them was that the Ba'ath Party started to penetrate the army. And the army so happened to actually attracted, as you can imagine, this is true about many armies, especially in traditional societies, to attract people from the countryside. Shall we say peasants, And it so happens that one of these areas was the area which is mostly populated by the Alawis in northwestern Syria. So they were attracted to the army, and many of them were also recruited by extension into the Ba'ath Party. And that led actually to the eventual domination by both the army and the Ba'ath Party, as well as the whole political system, by Alawis, although they are a small minority. So that, and then eventually with time, I think you started to have a system which was very undemocratic, still is. There's a great deal of patronage by the state, control by the state and the army and the intelligence secret service. And there's a great deal of corruption. Despite all this, the economy was very good in terms of the national income and the lack of foreign debts. So I think that was one of the triggers. I think Roger is going to be talking more about the current situation, but let me just highlight a few points. I think we need to look at two types of players in what's happening. We also need to look at the context not just of Syria, but of the broader world, particularly in the context of the so-called Arab Spring, which started at the end of 2010, the beginning of 2011. At that time, the Syrian regime was saying it's not going to happen in our country because we are different, etc. But it did happen. In other words, the elements who were dissatisfied with the Syrian regime, Ba'ath regime, got encouragement from the success or the apparent success of the Arab Spring, at least in Tunisia and to a certain extent in Egypt. And if you remember, to begin with, in fact, it was promising to be successful also in the Yemen. But then we have the setbacks in both Egypt and the Yemen as well. Finish reading my notes. So, but then this exploded. But how did it happen? I think to begin with, I remember when starting, I was in Beirut at the conference. It was really a protest. It started being peaceful. Then the regime resorted to force. Some people were killed and injured, and many people were in prison. This increased the opposition. And then I think that's when foreign players started to interfere. Now there are two interpretations or two perspectives again. I'm not talking about alternative facts, but I'm talking about different presentation, because you see, you need to remember that when people publish things, whether it is in articles by some academics or in, not all academics, or in the media, what you are getting really is a presentation. It's not necessarily the facts or the truth. So you have the Syrian regime, which claims that everything was fine, and then there was the American CIA and the Saudis and the Qataris interfered. And then you have the other one which says, actually, we are just freedom fighters who have arisen against dictatorship and oppression. But there's no doubt now that the number of external players is quite complicated. You have direct intervention, I think, from Turkey. Now Turkey actually should control a small strip of land in the north of Syria. You certainly have a strong presence from the Iranian army and intelligence and support. You have a strong presence from Hezbollah, from Lebanon, which is aligned to Iran. You have intervention from Israel, which is actually supporting some of the elements of the opposition, including some of the extreme Islamists, by the way, such as Jabhat al-Nusra. We know that some of them actually go and get treated when they are wounded in Israeli hospitals, then they get rehabilitated, and they get some arrangement with the Israeli intelligence and get back into Syria. Israel has been also bombarding parts of Syria, including areas near Damascus. Jordan also is playing, as you're there, I can say that, a game which I don't think is very clean all the way. Recently, King Abdullah apparently suggested to Donald Trump that there should be a so-called security zone in the south. Turkey is thinking the security zone in the north. So and the people are already talking like they were talking about dividing Iraq into 3 sections, Kurds in the north, Sunni in the center, Shia in the south. Now they are talking about Alawis near Latakia, Aleppo, and the rest, Kurds and so on, and then you keep a small place in Damascus and other places. So there's already this kind of talk. I don't think the Syrians really want that. I have been looking at some reports from journalists who I think are independent, who have spoken to many people, including people in the Syrian army and in the opposition. And they find that really the majority of Syrians, although they are now becoming more aware of their sectarian belonging, want the integrity of Syria to survive. The other problem, the last point I will make, is the whole thing which, the exploding problems, the chaos which resulted from the American-led invasion of Iraq, the chaos in Iraq, has now a worse chaos in Syria. And there is a strong connection between what's happening in Syria and Iraq, because, the Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi really is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, which has come into Iraq immediately after the American invasion, and Zarqawi starting, and then Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was one of his followers. So and they control Raqqa as well as, at least temporarily, parts of Mosul. Before that, they controlled the whole city. And they have control of Tadmor and other places. They are actually, I think a few hours ago, they were attacking a line of communication and movement for the Syrian army near Aleppo. So the danger, I think, for Aleppo is not just from the regime, it's also from ISIS and other groups. So that's very important to keep in mind. The external players are not confined to the countries I mentioned, because apparently there are warriors with ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra from at least 73 different countries. And some of them, the ISIS is small, most of them actually are not really educated Muslims or knowledgeable Muslims. Apparently some of them are just given a book called Islam for Dummies. That's a humor, isn't it? And they read it, and it's so black and white and very narrow-minded, and they go on and get to fight, hoping to go to paradise. Meanwhile, the population of Syria are living in hell. So it's a very complicated subject, and I think just scratch the surface. So my colleague and friend Roger will speak.